The first chill of autumn had settled over our suburban Connecticut neighborhood, turning the leaves on the old oak trees in our yard into a blaze of crimson and gold. It was a Saturday, and the air was crisp and carried the smell of wood smoke. I, Chloe, was in what I lovingly called my nesting mode. My husband, Mark, and I had been trying for a baby for over a year, and every change of season felt like a fresh start, a new page where our dream might finally be written. Mark was in the garage, tinkering with his project car, a vintage Mustang that was more rust than metal but was his sanctuary. From the kitchen window, I watched him, a fond smile on my face. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of all-American good looks that made me feel lucky every day. We'd been high school sweethearts, married at 22, and now, at 28, our lives felt like they were building towards a perfect, predictable crescendo: a house, 2 careers, his in finance, mine as a graphic designer working remotely, and soon, a family. "The guys are coming over to watch the fight tonight," Mark said, coming in through the back door, his hands smudged with grease. He kissed my cheek, his skin cool from the outside air. "Which guys?" I asked, already mentally inventorying the fridge for snacks. "Jake, Ben, and probably Mike," he said, the slight hesitation before Mike's name barely registering. Mike was newer to the group. Mark had met him at the gym a few months back. He was different from Jake and Ben, who were like extensions of our own history. Jake was a goofball, a childhood friend who told embarrassing stories about Mark's teenage years. Ben was quieter, more thoughtful, a fellow finance guy who talked about market trends with a surprising passion. Mike was sharper. He had a slickness to him, a constant, low-grade intensity that I found draining. He was always dressed too well for casual gatherings, his watch was always a statement, and his compliments always felt like they had a hidden edge. But Mark seemed to admire his confidence, his unapologetic ambition. "The guy's a shark, Chloe. You can learn a lot from him," he'd say. I pushed my mild discomfort aside. "Okay, no problem. I'll make some wings and nachos. Just try to keep the beer bottles from taking over the living room this time." He grinned, that easy, boyish grin that still made my heart flip. "You're the best." The evening began like any other fight night. Jake and Ben arrived first, bringing with them the comfortable, familiar chaos of long friendship. They hugged me, complimented the spread of food I'd laid out, and immediately started ribbing Mark about the Mustang's lack of progress. Then Mike arrived. He didn't knock, he just let himself in, holding a bottle of top-shelf tequila like a trophy. "Evening, all. Chloe, you look beautiful. This house gets more magazine-ready every time I see it." "Thanks, Mike," I said, forcing a smile. "Can I get you a beer?" "Tequila for me tonight, darling. We're celebrating." He didn't say what, and no one asked. I retreated to my usual spot, the large, overstuffed armchair in the corner of the living room with my laptop. It was my understood role during these gatherings, the gracious hostess, present but not intrusive, part of the background. I'd work on a design project, half watch the fights, and enjoy the hum of male camaraderie. It was a sound I associated with safety, with the normalcy of my life with Mark. The first few fights passed in a blur of shouts and commentary. The room grew loud and warm, filled with the smell of hot sauce and testosterone. I was deep into a client's logo redesign, the noise of familiar white noise, when I felt a shift. The easy, boisterous laughter began to take on a harder, coarser edge. The conversations, which had been about sports and work, started to dip into territory that made the back of my neck prickle. It was Mike who started it. He was holding court, his voice louder than the others. "So, I'm seeing this woman, right? A real piece of work. Thinks because she's a lawyer, she can run the show." "Yeah? What's the problem with that?" Ben asked, ever the reasonable one. "The problem is she doesn't know her place," Mike said, taking a swig of tequila. "A woman like that needs to be taken down a peg. Reminded who's really in charge." I glanced up from my screen. Mark was laughing, but it was a nervous laugh. Jake was looking into his beer, uncomfortable. Ben just shook his head. "Come on, man, that's a bit much," Ben said. "It's reality," Mike shot back, his eyes glinting. He then turned his gaze directly to me. "What do you think, Chloe? You're a successful woman. You work from home, make your own money. Does Mark here have trouble keeping you in line?" The room went silent for a beat. All eyes turned to me. I felt a hot flush creep up my chest. "I'm not a dog that needs to be kept on a leash, Mike," I said, trying to keep my tone light, but the edge was unmistakable. Mark jumped in. "Hey, Mike, leave her out of it. Let's just watch the fight." But Mike was like a shark that had scented blood. He waved Mark off, his focus still locked on me. I'm just saying, a woman's independence is a beautiful thing, until it isn't. Until she starts thinking she doesn't need a man. That's when the respect goes out the window. He then launched into a graphic, degrading story about a different woman he'd dated, using language that was so crude and objectifying it made my skin crawl. I looked at Mark, my eyes pleading. Say something. Stop him. This is our home. Mark took a long pull from his beer bottle. Mike, dude, cool it, he muttered, but there was no force behind it. It was a whisper against a hurricane. Mike just laughed. What, Anderson? You can't handle a little real talk. You got a good woman here, a loyal woman, but you gotta establish the frame. You can't let them get too comfortable, too independent. The main event started, and the attention shifted back to the TV. But the atmosphere was poisoned. I tried to focus on my work, but the words were swimming on the screen. My safe space had been violated, and my husband, my protector, the man who had vowed to cherish me, had done nothing but offer a weak, ineffectual murmur. An hour later, the fight was over. Jake and Ben, sensing the tension, made quick excuses and left. Mike, however, showed no signs of moving. He poured himself another glass of tequila and sat back on the sofa, looking utterly at home. Great fight, he slurred slightly. The underdog always has more heart. Mark was cleaning up bottles, his movements stiff. Yeah, it was good. I stood up, closing my laptop with a definitive snap. I'm going to head to bed. Good night, Mike. So early? Mike said, a slow, unpleasant smile spreading across his face. The night's young. Come on, sit with us for a bit. Mark never lets you have any fun. My blood ran cold. I'm tired, I said firmly and turned to leave. That's when Mike stood up, blocking my path to the hallway. He was close, too close. I could smell the tequila on his breath. Just one drink with us, Chloe. Don't be a prude. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I looked past him at Mark, who was frozen by the kitchen island, a trash bag in his hand. His face was a mask of conflict, but his feet were rooted to the spot. Mike, I said I'm going to bed, I repeated, my voice trembling now. And I said, have a drink with us, he replied, his voice dropping to a low, intimidating register. He reached out and put his hand on my arm. It wasn't a violent grip, but it was possessive, entirely inappropriate. His thumb stroked my bare skin, and a wave of nausea washed over me. This was the line. This was the moment. This was no longer just offensive talk. This was a physical violation in my own home. My eyes locked with Mark's. Now, do something now. And he did. He cleared his throat. Mike, come on, man, let her go. It was the same weak, pleading tone. It had no power. It was an invitation for Mike to push further. Mike chuckled, not even looking at Mark. His eyes were on me, predatory and sure. See, he doesn't mind. He knows you're in good hands. He leaned in closer, his face inches from mine. You know, Chloe, a woman like you shouldn't be wasted on a guy who's afraid to take what he wants. You deserve a real man. The world narrowed to that single, horrifying point. The feel of his hand on my arm, the smell of his cologne mixed with alcohol, the leer in his eyes, and the crushing, soul-destroying sight of my husband, standing there, doing nothing. He was just watching. His jaw was clenched, his fists were balled, but he was a statue. He was letting this happen. He was allowing his friend to disrespect me, to touch me, to proposition me in our own living room. In that moment, something in me broke. A fundamental pillar of my reality, that Mark was my safe harbor, shattered into a million pieces. I wrenched my arm free with a strength I didn't know I possessed. Don't you ever touch me again, I hissed, my voice low and venomous. I didn't look at Mark. I couldn't. I turned and walked, my legs feeling like rubber, down the hall to our bedroom. I closed the door and leaned against it, listening. There was a long silence. Then, I heard Mike's laugh, a low, ugly sound. You need to loosen up your wife, Anderson. She's wound way too tight. And then I heard Mark's voice, quiet, mumbled. I couldn't make out the words, but there was no anger in them, no defense of me. It was the sound of acquiescence, of a man too weak to defend his own wife. A few minutes later, I heard the front door close. Mike was gone. I stood there in the dark, my entire body shaking. The tears weren't sadness, they were pure, undiluted rage and betrayal. I heard Mark's footsteps approach the bedroom door. He paused outside for a moment, then turned and went into the guest room. That was it. The final, silent confirmation. He knew the magnitude of what he had allowed to happen, and he couldn't even face me. The night stretched on, an endless, dark chasm. I replayed the scene over and over in my head. Mike's disgusting words, his violating touch. But worse, infinitely worse, was the image of Mark, my husband, standing by and letting it happen. His inaction was a louder, more brutal form of infidelity than any physical affair could ever be. He had been unfaithful to his vow to protect me. He had been unfaithful to the trust that was the foundation of our marriage. He had handed my dignity to his friend on a silver platter and then watched as it was trampled. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in pale, innocent hues of pink and orange. When I finally moved from my spot by the door, I felt 100 years older. The hopeful woman planning for a baby the day before was gone, replaced by someone hollowed out and hard. I walked into the kitchen. Mark was already there, sitting at the table, his head in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his eyes red-rimmed and full of a desperate plea. "Chloe, I am so sorry. I don't know what happened. I just froze. I didn't say anything. I filled the kettle with water, my movements mechanical." The silence in the room was heavier than any shouting could have been. He's so aggressive. I didn't know how to stop him without making a scene," he continued, his voice cracking. I placed the kettle on the stove and turned to face him. The man I loved looked like a stranger, a weak, pathetic stranger. "Making a scene?" My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. "Mark," he put his hands on me. "In our home, he told you, to your face, that you weren't enough of a man for me, and you were worried about making a scene." He flinched. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple." The dam broke, and all the cold fury of the night came rushing out. "It is exactly that simple. Your only job in that moment was to be my husband, to stand up for me, to throw that piece of garbage out of our house. You didn't just freeze, Mark. You chose your comfort, your fear of conflict with that animal, over your wife's safety and respect. You let him cross a line that should never, ever exist." Tears were streaming down his face now. "I'll call him. I'll tell him he's never welcome here again. I'll fix this." "You can't," I said, the fight suddenly draining out of me, leaving only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. "You can't fix this. The moment is gone. You had your chance to be a man, to be my husband, and you failed. That's a bell you can't unring." I picked up my car keys from the counter. "Where are you going?" he asked, panic in his voice. "To my sister's. I need to be away from you." "Chloe, please, don't go. Let's talk about this."